Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I am Andrew Sumner, and that right there is Garth Ennis. How are you, mate?
Pretty good, Andrew. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well. I'm very well. It feels like no time since we were last chatting, and I enjoyed that one so much. I'm glad you've joined me again to talk about a brand new project out from Ahoy Comics, coming soon. BABS. You and Jacen once more.
That's right. Jacen Burrows, gosh, he and I must have done coming up on 1,000 pages together at this point. I mean, 303 and Wormwood and Crossed, obviously, but also a couple of Punisher series and the Ribbon Queen and now Babs. Babs is a sword and sorcery story. It's the story of a female barbarian called Babs, Babs the Barbarian. And as you can probably guess, it doesn't take the genre too seriously. It is not an out-and-out comedy. It is not some sort of wall-to-wall satire. It is hopefully a fairly amusing, fairly action-packed adventure in the tradition of nothing you've quite seen before in that genre. But you'll read it and you'll see some familiar elements. If you're familiar with fantasy, small f, if you're familiar with the sword and sorcery genre.
Yeah. I mean, mate, I'm so intrigued from the pages I've seen thus far. And was it when you told Jacen about the concept, was he all in from the get-go?
Very much so. And in fact, when I started to send him scripts and he started to do a few designs for characters, he said, I would happily draw this stuff for the rest of my career. He said, I think there's something about that genre, about the world of elves and giants and dragons and hobbits and treasure hordes and magic and wizards, that while it can inspire maybe a certain laziness in a lot of people, you only have to go into the sort of sci-fi fantasy section of any bookstore and see the covers on the books, and you see the multiple series, book 7 in the Grundalax saga or whatever. You get the idea. It does lead people down some very familiar paths, but at the same time, it is simultaneously ripe for parody, and it can inspire a good deal of I think interesting creativity. And it's hard not to be fond of it on some basic level. I mean, you and I have talked about Hawk the Slayer, but even beyond that, The Hobbit is one of the first books I ever read as a kid, and I still regard it as storytelling 101. I think that's, that story separate from Lord of the Rings and the rest of Tolkien's output, where he maybe begins to take himself a bit too seriously. I still regard The Hobbit as being a perfect story. And when it goes in at that age, of course, it never comes out.
No, actually, The Hobbit is it's interesting, isn't it? Because for me, the Lord of the Rings was a trio of films that was an improvement over the books, right? But The Hobbit is quite the opposite. Those three bloated, super long films are kind of just a like gelatinous mess compared to the book itself, which is super tight.
Yeah, I didn't even bother with them, to be honest with you. I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings movies, but when I heard they were going to do 3 Hobbit movies, I thought, well, obviously someone's going to beat this thing to death,
right on.
In the interests of franchise. And so as I understand it, it turned out. But again, I think that there's enough in the genre that you can certainly parody other people's excesses with it, while at the same time coming up with something new and interesting of your own. I hope that's what I've done with Babs. I mean, writing a female character and having, what would you call it? Maybe read Sonya if she didn't talk fluent hyperbole, like
Yeah.
characters like that seem to feel the need to do. And
Yeah.
she had a sense of humor as well. And she was constantly down on her luck, and um, people were frightened of her, but at the same time realized that she was quite easy to take advantage of. If you imagine someone like that, you've probably got Babs. To sum it up in one line, great at the job, but crap at life. Incredibly unlucky. One of my favorite kinds of character.
Of course, of course. I mean, that's very well said. And the great thing about sword and sorcery, which we've all got a fondness for on some
Yeah.
level, as you've identified, is that it's chock full of these ridiculous archetypes. The minute you it's like the Emperor's New Clothes. The minute you start going, well, hang on, this is the same fucking character all the time. And don't you think it's a bit ridiculous? Do people really talk this way? Even then, do they? And it's all of that. And there's so many of these brilliant archetypes. So if somebody like you wants to play with them, you can
Yeah.
have endless fun with that, no doubt.
Yes. The kind of character I would probably shy away from the most would be the Conan type, the
Yeah.
grim-faced, scowling, doom-laden character who I guess there's humor in those stories, but the characters, the stories take themselves so seriously that I just can't. I like to think that Tolkien's work, well, at least in The Hobbit, had a streak of humor running through
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
And at that point, Tolkien is doing no more than telling a nice story that I think his nephew and niece can enjoy. And he doesn't have ideas beyond that in terms of stature. And I think the story is all the better for it.
Yeah.
So a certain lightness of touch is required when you're writing sword and sorcery, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. What can you tell me about the opening premise of the series?
Well, Babs, down on her luck as ever, and with no more to her name than an aging horse and a very sarcastic magic sword called Barry, who is really of no use to her whatsoever, except as a sword. I mean, she points out his shortcomings very early on, and Barry answers her in kind. So they have this quite abrasive relationship. Babs rolls into another little town. She's meeting up with her old friend Izzy for a drink. Izzy's another down in her luck barbarian. Um, both of them have Babs more so, but they both tend to fall victim to get rich quick schemes, stealing the dragon horde, only to then accidentally run over a bunch of leprechauns in your war chariot and ending up having to pay the whole lot out as compensation. Buying into a alchemist scheme to transmute base metal into gold, and then never hearing from the bastard again, things like that. And more by luck than judgment, really. Bob stumbles into a scheme by one Tiberius Toledo and the White Knights of Unblemished Virtue, who have come to this village as they come to so many villages, promising big social change for the locals. Uh, you won't be surprised to hear when it's the White Knights of Unblemished Virtue that big social change means getting rid of anyone who doesn't look like you. Uh, and Babs and Barry and Izzy and another character who you'll meet in part two called Colin Culpepper, who's basically the crappiest knight in the realm, accidentally get tangled up in Tiberius schemes and pretty soon find themselves, well, as Babs puts it, all I wanted to do is make a few bob, and I'm ending up on another fucking adventure.
So that it seems to me that there are some elements in common with your temporal criminal stuff, right?
Yeah, actually, Bob sits quite well alongside Marjorie Finnegan Temporal Criminal, but also alongside Code Prue, which is the paranormal paramedic
Yeah.
that I did a few years ago. I think Prue and Babs and Marge could all work quite well together. They're not very similar people. Um, Prue is far too down to earth and takes things too seriously. Um, Marge is a complete lunatic. Babs has fairly low priorities, I have to say. But I think the tone of their stories means they could fit quite well together. So if you enjoyed either of those two, you'll probably like Babs. Babs is a good deal more action packed, a good deal more violent, but it has plenty. I like to think it has plenty of humor in it as well, and a good rollicking adventure to keep things ticking over.
Excellent, mate. And to talk a bit about your long working relationship with Jacen, one of the things that as a fan of his that I admire, that I think he does better than anybody else in comics, and that sounds like a highfalutin statement, but I think you'll agree when I finish the sentences. I think he does extreme violence better than anybody else. You know, his ability to just capture these moments of extremity, but also with quite a sort of weather eye, you know, where it's so matter of fact on one level, it makes it even more dismaying.
I think you're right about that. I always thought of Jacen as heavily influenced by Steve Dillon in that
Well,
regard.
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Steve could always make an act of violence far more disturbing simply by not overplaying it. So
Yeah,
many people go absolutely balls to the wall crazy with this kind of stuff. Steve, I think, always knew that actually if you underplay it, it can be a lot nastier. Jacen gets that as well. So I think, you know, they also share a very strong sense of character, very strong sense of storytelling. Now Jacen's adapted his approach slightly for Babs because it is, for all the violence and action in it, it is a good deal more lighthearted a
yeah,
story, Ribbon Queen or the Get Fury Punisher story that's
yeah,
currently run. So by necessity, he's altered his approach just a little bit, but you will still see some of that sort of razor sharp, haha, Burrows storytelling when it comes to the violence. I mean, that's still definitely in there.
yeah. Brilliant. I mean, I just can't wait. And I think I couldn't think of a better pair of creators to subvert the sword and sorcery barbarian genre. And again, the pages that Ahoy have released so far look fantastic. And the book we're talking about, Babs, the Barbarian, coming soon from Ahoy Comics, from Garth Ennis and Jacen Burrows. It's available for pre-order in the links attached to our conversation. And mate, as ever, it's just great hanging out with you and chatting.
Yeah, you too, Andrew. See you
I'll,
again
I'll
soon.
see you very soon. Take care, mate. All the best.
Cheers.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.